My father, James Curren Warf, Professor Emeritus of Chemistry and enduring peace activist, died November 7, 2008. He was 91 years old. He was the last remaining survivor of his generation in our family. Born in a small town in the hills of Tennessee and growing up in Tulsa, Oklahoma during the era of segregation, he carried a lifelong rejection of racism. He married my mother, Lee Lola Walker, in Tulsa, whom he met in an undergraduate psychology class. They had 3 children, my sister Sandy in 1945, I was born in 1949, and my brother Barney in 1956. My father was a scientist and group leader on the Manhattan Project during World War II, a Guggenheim Fellow in Geneva after the war, and then a lifelong peace activist. He held patents for the process of separating plutonium from high-level nuclear waste, founded and was a lifetime member of the Federation of American Scientists, and worked indefatigably to ban the bomb. For years, he traveled widely to lecture on nuclear disarmament, testified before congressional hearings, and served on independent review panels that surveyed safety and storage methods at nuclear power plants. As a youth, he became politicized during the Spanish Civil War, and after World War II, he was proud of being called a premature anti-fascist by the right wing. He hid his left political books during the McCarthy era, and Jewish friends asked if he would take their children if it happened here. I remember as a child wrestling with him on the floor, hearing bedtime stories of his childhood in Tulsa. He had been the local boy scientist and would tell me harrowing stories of exploding small bombs in the storm drains. As a teenager, he introduced me to the I.F. Stone Weekly and made sure I followed the events of the civil rights movement as they unfolded. On faculty at the Department of Chemistry at the University of Southern California for 40 years, my father authored a multitude of original research papers, many with a focus on rare earth metals, his specialty. I still can't really understand the titles of most of them. He became fascinated with Indonesia and spent a total of about 10 years teaching chemistry at medical schools in Indonesia and Brunei, including 4 years with me and my siblings as children in Jakarta and Surabaya. As a 14-year-old, he and I took a lengthy trip on a small freighter, sleeping on the hull with 50 or 60 other people through the eastern islands of Indonesia. He was the faculty sponsor for USC's small anti-war Students for a Democratic Society chapter in the late 1960s. My sister Sandy and her friends made up most of the campus group. He proudly gained notoriety among some on campus for putting up anti-war posters during the Indochina War, sometimes as the sole sane voice. He was with me at many anti-war marches during the 60s and 70s, and always stayed with me during the ups and downs of those radical days. He was an inspector at the nuclear weapons sites in Kazakhstan in the 1980s, and loudly sounded alarms about the effects of radiation. He served as a scientific resource and advisor for Committee to Bridge the Gap, Physicians for Social Responsibility, and other anti-nuclear proliferation organizations. About a year before his diagnosis of cancer of the spine, he co-wrote an article titled The Future of Nuclear Power, published in the February 2008 Monthly Review. He argued against building new nuclear plants to help offset global warming. He foresaw the enormous potential hazard to the Earth and humanity of generating dangerous radioactive waste that will last tens, even hundreds of thousands of years. His wife Lee, my mother, died in 1959. My brother was 2 years old, I was 10, and my sister was 14. All of us were traumatized in our own way, and there was nothing in my father's life experience that equipped him to be the single father of 3 children. I learned from him about grief and loss and recovery. I learned about humanism and human equality. I learned about the historic urgency of peace and about the threat of fascism. I learned about the marvelous variety of human cultures on our planet. I learned to love literature. I learned about love without reservation. I learned to question authority. I learned the importance of history and the incapacitation of fear. I learned about forgiveness and human imperfection. Over the last few months, he had become increasingly confused. But there were moments of clarity, including about 3 weeks before his death, when all of his children visited, and he told us that he loved us, and we were able to say goodbye. My father was an amazing and brilliant man, with his share of human failings, and I loved him. He was with me at my birth, nurtured me as a child, and I had the privilege of caring for him through his death. He died in the presence of his family, in dignity and without suffering.